The autumn wind carried whispers of death through the Carpathian mountains, and in the small village of Brasov, nestled between ancient forests and forgotten roads, the people spoke in hushed tones about the castle that loomed on the distant cliff. It had stood there for centuries, a monument to darkness and power, its towers piercing the crimson sky like accusing fingers. The villagers crossed themselves when they passed the iron gates at sunset, and mothers warned their daughters never to venture near the forbidden grounds where the roses grew blood red and the shadows moved with a life of their own. Elena had heard these warnings all her 21 years, yet poverty cares nothing for superstition. When her father fell ill with consumption and the harvest failed, leaving her family with nothing but hunger and despair, she had no choice but to accept the position offered by the castle's steward. The pay was generous, far more than any common girl could hope to earn in the village, and the work seemed simple enough. She would tend the gardens, maintain the rose beds, and keep the grounds presentable. The steward, an ancient man with milky eyes and a voice like rustling parchment, had told her she would work alone, that the master of the castle valued his privacy above all things, and that she must never, under any circumstances, enter the castle itself or wander the grounds after sunset. Elena accepted these terms without hesitation. She was a practical girl, raised on hard work and little else, with chestnut hair that fell in simple waves past her shoulders, and eyes the color of moss after rain. Her beauty was the quiet kind, the kind that revealed itself slowly, like dawn breaking over the mountains. She had small, calloused hands from years of labor, and a spirit that refused to break no matter how heavy the burden. Her mother had died giving birth to her younger brother, and Elena had raised him herself while caring for her ailing father. She knew nothing of romance or poetry, only the weight of responsibility and the ache of an empty stomach. On her first morning at the castle, she arrived before dawn, carrying a worn basket and wearing her only good dress, a simple grey wool that had belonged to her mother. The iron gates stood open, as if expecting her, and she walked the long path through gardens that had once been magnificent, but now grew wild with neglect. Thorned vines crawled up ancient statuary, and fountains stood dry and cracked, their stone angels weeping moss instead of water. Yet the roses thrived, impossibly vibrant, their crimson petals so dark they appeared almost black in the early light. They grew everywhere, climbing the walls, spreading across the ground, their perfume heavy and intoxicating, like wine mixed with something forbidden. Eleanor set to work immediately, clearing weeds from the pathways and pruning the overgrown hedges. The physical labor felt familiar and comforting, and she lost herself in the rhythm of it, in the simple satisfaction of bringing order to chaos. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, though its light seemed reluctant to fully penetrate the grounds, as if something about the place repelled brightness itself. She worked through the morning and into the afternoon, pausing only to eat the dry bread and cheese she had brought from home. It was near twilight when she first saw him. The sun had begun its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood, and Elena was gathering her tools to leave when movement caught her eye near the eastern wall. A man emerged from behind a trellis, heavy with climbing roses, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in soft waves, and he wore the simple clothes of a working man, rough linen and worn leather. But there was nothing simple about his face. It was a face carved by angels and cursed by demons, beautiful in a way that made her heart ache with an emotion she could not name. His eyes were deep and dark, holding shadows and secrets, and when they met hers, she felt something shift inside her chest like a door opening in a room she had never known existed. He smiled, and it was a gentle smile, tinged with sadness. "Good evening," he said, and his voice was soft, cultured, completely at odds with his humble clothing. "You must be Elena. I have been watching you work today. You have brought life back to these gardens." She found her voice, though it trembled slightly. "I'm only doing what I was hired to do, sir. I did not know anyone else worked here. The steward told me I would be alone." He stepped closer, moving with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, as if he walked on air rather than earth. "I am not officially employed here," he said. "I tend the roses because I love them. They are all that remains beautiful in this place. My name is Adrian, Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had never been comfortable around men, especially handsome ones, and this Adrian unsettled her in ways she could not explain. There was something about him that felt both dangerous and protective, like standing near a fire on a winter night. She nodded politely and turned to gather her basket, but his voice stopped her. "Will you return tomorrow?" he asked, and there was something in his tone, a loneliness so profound it made her want to weep. "Yes," she said. "I will return every day until the work is done. Then I shall look forward to seeing you again," he replied, and before she could respond, he turned and walked back toward the shadows near the wall, disappearing so quickly and completely that she wondered if she had imagined him. That night, Elena lay awake in her small bed in the cottage she shared with her father and brother, listening to her father's labored breathing in the next room. She told herself that Adrian was simply another servant, perhaps a groundskeeper who preferred to work in the evening hours. There was nothing strange about that, yet her mind kept returning to his face, to the sorrow in his eyes, to the way her heart had raced when he smiled at her. She had never felt such things before, had never understood why the village girls giggled and whispered about boys, but now in the darkness, she began to understand. It was a dangerous understanding, and she pushed it away, reminding herself that she was there to work, to earn money for her family, nothing more. The next evening, as the sun began its descent, Adrian appeared again. This time he carried gardening shears and worked alongside her, pruning the roses with expert precision. They spoke little at first, but the silence between them was comfortable, companionable. He showed her which roses needed more attention, which could be cut back severely, and which required a gentler touch. His hands moved with such care, such tenderness, that she found herself watching him more than the flowers. Over the following weeks, their evening meetings became routine. Adrian would appear at dusk, always dressed in his simple working clothes, and they would tend the gardens together until full darkness fell. He spoke little of himself, but he listened intently when she talked about her family, her fears for her father, her dreams of a better life. He had a way of making her feel seen, truly seen, in a way no one ever had before. He asked her about her thoughts, her opinions, treating her not as a simple peasant girl, but as someone whose mind and heart mattered. One evening, as they worked beneath a trellis heavy with pale roses that glowed like ghosts in the fading light, Adrian suddenly stopped and looked at her with such intensity that she froze. "Eleanor," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer or a confession. "Do you believe that some people are born cursed, that they are condemned to exist in shadow, forever separated from light and warmth and love?" She set down her shears, disturbed by the anguish in his voice. "I believe that God forgives all who truly seek redemption," she said softly. "No one is beyond saving." He smiled, but it was the saddest smile she had ever seen. "You have such faith," he whispered, "such beautiful, innocent faith. I pray you never lose it." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned away and she saw his shoulders tremble as if he were fighting some internal battle. She reached out instinctively, placing her hand on his arm, and felt him stiffen at her touch. "Please," she said, "whatever burdens you carry, you do not have to carry them alone." He turned back to her, and in the twilight, his eyes seemed to gleam with an inner light, something ancient and inhuman. Then he blinked, and they were simply dark eyes again, beautiful and haunted. "You are too kind. Elena, too pure for this place. Promise me you will never come here after dark. Promise me you will leave before the sun sets completely." "Why?" she asked, fear beginning to creep into her heart. "Adrian, what are you afraid of?" "Not for myself," he said. "For you. There are things in this castle, things that should not exist in God's world. Promise me." She promised, though she did not understand, and that night she dreamed of roses red as blood and eyes that gleamed in darkness. The autumn deepened, and with it, her feelings for Adrian grew beyond her control. She found herself thinking of him constantly, counting the hours until she could see him again. She noticed everything about him, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the elegant length of his fingers, the sadness that never quite left his eyes even when he smiled. She had never felt desire before, had never understood its power, but now it consumed her like fever. She wanted to touch him, to comfort him, to chase away whatever darkness haunted him. One evening in late October, when the air had turned sharp with the promise of winter and the roses had begun to wither despite their care, Elena made a decision. She had stayed later than usual, working until the sun had fully set and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. She knew Adrian would be angry with her for breaking her promise, but she needed to see him, needed to tell him what burned in her heart. She found him in the rose garden, kneeling before a bush of deep crimson blooms, his face turned toward the rising moon. He did not seem surprised to see her, though his expression darkened. "Elena," he said, his voice sharp with fear and something else, something that sounded like hunger. "You should not be here. You must leave. Now." "No," she said, moving toward him with more courage than she felt. "I will not leave. Not until you tell me the truth. Not until you tell me why you look at me the way you do. Why you speak to me as if every word might be your last. Why you disappear into the shadows like a ghost." He rose to his feet, and in the moonlight he seemed taller, more imposing, no longer the gentle gardener, but something ancient and powerful. "Because I am a ghost," he said, a shadow of a man cursed to exist between life and death, forever hungry, forever alone. She should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but instead she stepped closer. "I do not believe in curses," she whispered. "I believe in you. I believe in the goodness I see in your eyes, in the gentleness of your hands, in the way you care for these roses as if they were living souls." He made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You see what you want to see, Elena. You are blind to what I truly am." "Then show me," she said, and before he could protest, before she could lose her courage, she closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The world stopped. For one perfect, impossible moment, there was only the softness of his mouth against hers, the sharp intake of his breath, the way his hands came up to cradle her face with a tenderness that made her want to weep. He tasted of night and roses and something darker, something that called to a part of her she had never known existed. She felt him tremble, felt him pull her closer, felt the desperation in the way he kissed her back as if she were salvation itself. Then he tore himself away with such violence that she stumbled. His eyes, when he looked at her, were no longer human. They glowed with a crimson light, and his mouth, his beautiful mouth, revealed fangs as white and sharp as winter frost. "What have you done?" he whispered, and his voice was agony and ecstasy combined. "What have you done, sweet Elena?" Before she could scream, before she could even process what she was seeing, another voice spoke from the darkness behind her, a voice of silk and ice and absolute authority. "She kissed the wrong man," the voice said. "Did you really think you could deceive her forever, brother?" Elena spun around and her heart stopped. Standing in the shadow of the castle wall was a man identical to Adrian in every way, the same face, the same build, the same dark hair. But where Adrian wore simple clothes, this man was dressed in black velvet and silver, his presence radiating power like heat from a forge. He stepped into the moonlight, and she saw that his eyes held no warmth, no sorrow, only ancient hunger and cruel amusement. The man smiled, revealing fangs identical to Adrian's. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," he said, executing a mocking bow. "I am Count Dracula, master of this castle and all its shadows, and you, my dear innocent Elena, just kissed the wrong man. The one kneeling before you in borrowed flesh is not the humble gardener you believed him to be. He is me, I am him. We are one and the same." "No," Elena whispered, looking between them, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were telling her. "No, that is impossible." The Count laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Nothing is impossible in my domain, child. I wanted to know you, to understand what made you different from all the others who came before. So I took a form you would not fear, played the role of the gentle servant, let you believe you were safe, and you gave me exactly what I desired. Your kiss, your trust, your heart." Adrian. She turned to the man she had kissed, the man she had fallen in love with, tears streaming down her face. "Tell me he is lying. Please." But Adrian, or the creature wearing his face, only looked at her with those glowing red eyes, and she saw the truth written in their depths. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I never meant for you to care. I never meant to care. Too late for regrets, the Count said, moving toward her with predatory grace. The kiss has bound her to you now, awakened the bond. You can feel it, cannot you, brother? Her blood calls to you, her heart beats in rhythm with yours. You have doomed her by your weakness, by your pathetic attempt at humanity. Elena backed away, her mind reeling, but there was nowhere to run. The castle loomed behind her, the forest stretched dark and impassable before her, and between stood two identical monsters, one wearing guilt like a shroud, the other wearing triumph like a crown. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The Count reached her first, his cold fingers tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. "Do not fear, my dear," he purred. "You will not die tonight. You are far too interesting for that. No, you will remain here in my castle where I can study this fascinating development. My other self has done something I thought impossible. He has felt something. And you, innocent little Eleanor, you have made the monster remember what it means to want something beyond blood. Please," she managed to whisper, "please let me go. My family needs me." "Your family will be cared for," the Count said dismissively. "They will receive more gold than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. Consider it payment for their daughter, who has just become the most valuable thing in my collection." He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, and she was too shocked, too terrified to struggle. As he carried her toward the castle, toward the open doors that yawned like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole, she looked back over his shoulder. Adrian still knelt in the rose garden, his borrowed face a mask of anguish, his glowing eyes following her until the darkness consumed them both. The last thing Eleanor saw before the castle doors closed behind her was a single crimson rose petal falling from the trellis, drifting down like a drop of blood upon the cold stone path. The castle was a tomb built for the living. Eleanor woke in a chamber that could have belonged to a queen, with silk hangings the color of dried blood and a canopied bed carved from black oak. Candles burned in silver sconces, though no one had lit them, their flames casting dancing shadows across walls covered in tapestries, depicting scenes of ancient battles and darker rituals. A fire roared in the massive stone hearth, despite the absence of any servant to tend it. Everything spoke of wealth and power, but also of loneliness so profound it had seeped into the very stones. She sat up slowly, her head pounding, her memories fragmented like broken glass. The kiss, the revelation, the Count's cold hands carrying her through corridors that seemed to twist and writhe like living things. She had fainted at some point, her mind unable to process the impossible truth, and now she found herself here dressed in a white nightgown she had never seen before, her own simple dress folded neatly on a chair by the window. The window. Eleanor ran to it, hoping desperately for escape, but the drop was sheer and deadly, hundreds of feet down to jagged rocks below. The glass was thick and ancient, and when she pressed her hand against it, she felt a strange vibration, as if the castle itself were alive and breathing. Beyond the window, the moon hung full and bloated in a sky too dark, too empty of stars, and she could see the rose garden far below, a splash of crimson against the grey stone courtyard. The door opened without a sound, and Elena spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. A woman entered, ancient and bent, wearing black robes that whispered across the floor like dead leaves. Her face was a map of wrinkles, her eyes milky with cataracts, but she moved with surprising swiftness as she set down a tray bearing food and wine. "Eat, child," the old woman said, her voice like wind through a crypt. "The master insists his guests maintain their strength. He will come for you when the moon reaches its zenith." Elena found her voice, though it shook. "Who are you? Where am I exactly? What does he want with me?" The old woman's laugh was dry and bitter. "I am Magda, and I have served this castle for more years than you have been alive. You are in the East Tower, in rooms that have not been occupied since the master's last bride. As for what he wants, that is between you and him. I am only here to ensure you do not starve or do something foolish like throwing yourself from that window. Though I warn you, many have tried. The castle does not release its prisoners so easily." "His last bride," Elena repeated, ice forming in her stomach. "What happened to her?" Magda's expression softened slightly, and for a moment, something almost like pity flickered in her clouded eyes. She tried to change him, to love the darkness out of him. She failed, as all before her failed. Love cannot redeem what God himself has cursed. Now eat. You will need your strength for what is to come." The old woman left as silently as she had arrived, and Elena was alone again with her terror and her thoughts. She approached the tray, her stomach churning with hunger despite her fear. There was fresh bread still warm from the oven, cheese, fruit that seemed impossibly ripe for the season, and wine so red it looked like blood in the crystal goblet. She ate mechanically, forcing herself to maintain her strength, knowing that if she wanted to escape, she needed to stay alive and alert. Hours passed, measured only by the slow progression of the moon across the sky. Eleanor explored her prison, finding that the door was unlocked, but led only to a corridor of closed doors and winding staircases that seemed to shift and change when she was not looking directly at them. Twice she tried to find her way down, and twice she ended up back at her own chamber, as if the castle itself conspired to keep her trapped. Finally, she returned to her room and waited, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching the door with a mixture of dread and something else, something she hated herself for feeling: anticipation. Because part of her, the part that had kissed him in the rose garden, that had fallen in love with the gentle gardener, wanted to see him again, wanted to understand, wanted to believe that the tenderness she had seen in his eyes had been real. When the door opened again, it was not the Count who entered, but Adrian. The same face she had kissed, the same sad eyes, but now she knew the truth. This was not a separate person, but another aspect of the monster who owned this castle. He stood in the doorway, no longer wearing simple working clothes but dressed in dark elegance, and he looked at her as if she were both his salvation and his damnation. "Elena," he said, and just the sound of her name on his lips made her heart ache. "I know you must hate me. I know you must think everything between us was a lie. But I need you to understand something. When I wore that form, when I walked with you in the gardens, I was not pretending. That part of me, the part that remembers being human, that longs for redemption, it is real. You awakened something I thought was dead forever." She stood, forcing herself to meet his gaze, despite the tears burning in her eyes. "How am I supposed to believe anything you say? You deceived me. You made me fall in love with a ghost, with a mask. Which one are you really? The gentle gardener or the monster who kidnapped me?" He moved into the room, and she saw the anguish etched into every line of his face. "I am both," he said. "I am neither. Do you know what it means to be a vampire, Elena? It means existing in fragments, torn between the human soul you once possessed and the demon that now inhabits your flesh. When I am the Count, I am all power and hunger and darkness. I feel nothing but contempt for human weakness. But when I take that other form, when I let myself remember what it felt like to be mortal, the soul fights back. And you made it fight harder than it has in centuries." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces of her breaking heart. "If that is true, if you truly felt something for me, then let me go. Release me before you destroy me completely." "I cannot," he said, and the desperation in his voice was unmistakable. "The kiss bound you to me. Your blood calls to me now, louder than any I have ever known. If I release you, the hunger will consume me. I will hunt you down without thought, without mercy, and I will drain you until there is nothing left. At least here I can protect you from that fate, from myself." "So I am to be your prisoner forever?" she demanded, anger finally breaking through her fear. "I am to live in this tomb, growing old while you remain eternally young, watching as everything I love in the world dies while I rot in luxury?" "No," he said, moving closer, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I will find a way to break the bond. There must be something in my library, some ancient knowledge, some ritual or spell that can sever the connection without killing us both. Until then, you are safe here. Your family will be cared for. You will want for nothing." "Accept my freedom," she said bitterly. "Accept my life." They stood in silence, the distance between them both infinite and non-existent. Finally, Adrian spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "There is something else you should know. Something the Count did not tell you. The man you thought you were kissing, the gardener Adrian, he exists. He is real." Elena felt the world tilt. "What are you saying?" "His name is Adrian Tepes, And he is my twin brother, my human twin brother. When I was transformed into this creature 3 centuries ago, he was spared, hidden away by those who loved us both. He has lived in the dungeons of this castle for decades, kept alive by my blood, aging slowly, neither fully mortal nor fully vampire. The Count used his form as a template, wore his face like a mask to deceive you. Your Adrian, the one you fell in love with, is a prisoner here just as you are now. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. There was a real Adrian, a human man who looked exactly like the monster before her. Hope and horror warred in her chest. Where is he? I want to see him. The vampire shook his head. That would be unwise. The Count keeps him weak, half-starved, barely conscious. To see him in that state would break your heart. And besides, the Count forbids it. He finds the entire situation amusing. The fact that you fell in love with a reflection of a reflection, a copy of a man who has not walked in sunlight for 50 years. Take me to him, Elena demanded, moving toward Adrian with more courage than she felt. If you truly care for me, if any part of what we shared was real, you will let me see this man. The real man, the one whose face you stole. Adrian's expression twisted with pain and something that might have been jealousy. You do not understand what you are asking. If you see him, if you speak to him, the bond between us will torment you even more. You will compare us constantly, will see in him everything I can never be again. Human, innocent, worthy of love. I do not care, she said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. I have been lied to enough. I deserve to know the truth, all of it. Take me to your brother or I will find him myself, even if I have to search every corridor and dungeon in this cursed place. They stared at each other, wills clashing, until finally Adrian nodded. Very well, but do not say I did not warn you. What you see will haunt you far more than any ghost. He led her from the chamber, through the twisting corridors she could never navigate alone, down spiral staircases that seemed to descend into the very heart of the earth. The air grew colder with each step, damp and thick with the smell of mold and ancient suffering. Torches burned in iron brackets along the walls, their light casting monstrous shadows that danced and writhed. Finally, they reached a heavy wooden door bound with chains and marked with symbols Eleanor recognized from her childhood church. Protective wards, useless against the master of the castle, but perhaps effective against lesser evils. Adrian produced a key from within his coat and unlocked the door, the chains falling away with a sound like breaking bones. Inside, the cell was small and bare, with only a thin layer of straw covering the stone floor, and a single barred window too high and narrow for even a child to escape through. And there, huddled in the corner, wrapped in rags that might once have been fine clothing, was a man. He looked up as they entered, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was Adrian's face, the same beautiful, tragic face, but ravaged by suffering and time. His hair was long and matted, his skin pale as death itself, his body thin to the point of starvation. But his eyes were human, fully human, filled with intelligence and pain and a desperate, clinging hope. "Brother," the real Adrian rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse, "have you finally come to release me? Or have you brought another victim to witness my shame?" The vampire moved into the cell, his expression unreadable. "Neither," he said. "This is Elena, the girl from the garden. She wanted to see you." The human Adrian's eyes found hers, and in them she saw recognition, as if he had been watching through some connection to his twin, experiencing everything second-hand. "So you are the one," he said softly, "the one who kissed him thinking it was me, the one who made the monster remember what it feels like to want something beyond blood and power." Eleanor knelt beside him, heedless of the filth, and reached out to touch his face. His skin was warm, fever-warm, so different from the vampire's cold perfection. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I did not know. I did not understand." The human Adrian smiled, and it was beautiful despite his degradation. "Do not apologize for showing kindness, even to a devil. That is more than most would do. Tell me, do you love him? The creature wearing my face?" She opened her mouth to deny it, But the lie would not come. "I thought I did," she said. "I fell in love with who I believed he was. Now I do not know what I feel. Betrayal, anger, but also something else. Something that refuses to die despite everything." "That is the bond," the vampire Adrian said from behind her, his voice tight with something that might have been pain. "The kiss created a connection between us. She feels what I feel, echoes of my thoughts, fragments of my emotions." "No," the human Adrian said, reaching up with a trembling hand to touch Elena's cheek. "What she feels is real. Do not let him convince you that magic is responsible for your heart. I have felt it too, through our connection." When she looks at him, when she speaks to him, there is love there, genuine love, and it terrifies him because he does not know what to do with it. "Enough," the vampire snapped, moving forward to pull Elena away. "You have seen him. You know the truth. Now we must return to the upper levels before the Count realizes we are here." But Elena resisted, clinging to the human Adrian's hand. "What will happen to him?" she demanded. "Will you leave him here to rot while I live in luxury above?" "What would you have me do?" the vampire asked, genuine anguish in his voice. "If I release him, he will die within days. My blood is the only thing keeping him alive, and he refuses to drink enough to fully transform. He would rather suffer for decades than become like me." "Then give me to him," Elena said suddenly, the idea crystallizing in her mind with perfect clarity. "If your blood sustains him, then let mine sustain him as well. I am bound to you anyway. Let my blood serve a purpose beyond feeding your curse." Both Adrians stared at her, identical expressions of shock on their different faces. "You do not know what you are offering," the human Adrian said. "To give your blood willingly, to sustain one such as me, it would weaken you. You would live in a state between life and death yourself." "I'm already in such a state," she replied, "trapped in a castle with a vampire bound to him by dark magic, unable to return to my family or my life. At least this way my suffering would have meaning. At least I could save one person from this nightmare." The vampire Adrian turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension. "The Count will never allow it. He wants you for himself, wants to study the bond between us, to understand why I feel anything for you at all." "Then we must not tell him," Elena said, her voice growing stronger with determination. "This can be our secret. You can bring me here at night and I will share my blood with your brother, slowly, carefully, just enough to restore his strength. And together, the three of us will find a way to escape this place." The human Adrian laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met, or the most foolish. Perhaps both. But I will not pretend I am noble enough to refuse your offer. I am tired, so tired of this existence. If your blood can give me the strength to stand, to think clearly, to help us find a way out of this hell, then I accept." The vampire Adrian turned back to them, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "You do not understand what you are asking of me. To watch you feed my brother, to smell your blood, to resist the urge to drink from you myself, it will be torture beyond anything I have endured." "Good," Elena said, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Perhaps a little torture is what you deserve. You have deceived me, imprisoned me, bound me to you with dark magic. The least you can do is help me save the one innocent person in this entire cursed castle." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the vampire nodded slowly. "Very well. I will bring you here 3 times a week after midnight, when the Count is occupied with his own pursuits. But you must be careful. My brother is right. Giving your blood will weaken you. You must eat well, maintain your strength, and never let the Count suspect what we are doing." "I can do that," Elena said, though fear shivered through her veins. The vampire produced a small knife from his coat, the blade silver and wickedly sharp. "Then we begin now. Time is a luxury we do not have." Elena held out her wrist without hesitation, watching as the blade opened a thin line across her pale skin. Blood welled up, impossibly red in the torchlight, and the human Adrian leaned forward with a sound that was half sob, half sigh of relief. His lips closed over the wound, and Elena felt a strange warmth spread through her body, not painful, but intimate in a way that made her blush. The vampire Adrian watched from the shadows, his eyes glowing with hunger and something deeper, something that looked almost like grief. When the human Adrian finally pulled away, his lips stained with her blood, he looked marginally stronger, the fog of starvation clearing slightly from his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have given me more than blood. You have given me hope." As the vampire Adrian bandaged her wrist with surprising gentleness and led her back through the labyrinth of corridors toward her chamber, Elena felt the weight of what she had begun settling over her shoulders. She had made herself part of something ancient and dangerous, had stepped willingly into a web of darkness and desire from which there might be no escape. But as she lay in her bed that night, her wrist throbbing with a dull ache, she felt no regret. She had found a purpose in this nightmare. She would save the human Adrian, the innocent prisoner. She would find a way to break the bond to his vampire twin, and somehow, impossibly, she would survive with her soul intact. The moon watched through her window like a knowing eye, and somewhere in the depths of the castle, she felt rather than heard the Count's laughter, cold and mocking, as if he knew exactly what she had done and found it all terribly amusing. The game, it seemed, had only just begun. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance between light and shadow, truth and deception. Elena maintained the facade of a compliant prisoner, accepting the luxuries the Count lavished upon her while secretly strengthening the human Adrian with her blood 3 nights each week. The vampire Adrian facilitated these meetings, torn between his duty to his darker self and his growing attachment to the woman who refused to fear him completely. During the day, Elena was left to her own devices in the East Tower. Magda brought her meals and fresh clothing, beautiful gowns of silk and velvet, that Elena accepted but wore with reluctance, feeling like a doll being dressed for some macabre performance. She spent her hours reading from the castle's vast library, books in languages she barely understood, filled with arcane knowledge and forbidden histories. She learned that Count Dracula had once been a prince, a warrior who had made a terrible bargain to gain the power to defend his lands, only to lose his humanity in the process. She learned that vampires could be destroyed but never truly killed, that they existed in a state between death and life, forever hungry, forever alone. But she also learned that there were rumors, old legends, of vampires who had been redeemed through love, though the texts were vague and contradictory. Some said a pure heart could break the curse. Others claimed that only death could free them. Elena copied passages into a small journal Magda had provided, hoping that somewhere in this mountain of ancient wisdom lay the key to their freedom. The nights belonged to the Count. He would visit her chamber after midnight, sometimes wearing his true form, imposing and coldly beautiful, other times appearing as the gentle Adrian she had first loved. He never touched her beyond taking her hand or brushing a strand of hair from her face, but his presence filled the room like a physical weight. He would talk for hours, speaking of centuries past, of battles fought and kingdoms fallen, of the unbearable loneliness of immortality. Elena learned to navigate these conversations carefully, to listen without encouraging, to respond without revealing the growing sympathy she felt for the monster. Because that was the terrible truth she was coming to understand. The Count was not merely evil. He was a tragedy given flesh, a man who had sacrificed everything for power and spent centuries regretting that choice while being unable to undo it. When he spoke of his human life, of the woman he had loved before his transformation, his voice carried a grief so profound that Elena found herself wanting to comfort him, even as she reminded herself of what he was. "You pity me," he said one night, catching the expression on her face. "How amusing. Most of my prisoners beg or scream or plot escape, but you look at me as if I were some wounded creature deserving of kindness." "Perhaps you are," Elena replied carefully. "Perhaps that is what vampires truly are, wounded creatures who forgot how to heal." The Count laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Careful, my dear. That kind of thinking is dangerous. Start seeing monsters as victims, and you may find yourself forgiving the unforgivable." "Is there anything that cannot be forgiven?" she asked. "Any sin so great that redemption becomes impossible?" He looked at her with ancient eyes that had witnessed empires rise and fall. "Yes," he said softly, Some sins stain the soul so deeply that even God turns away. I know, because I have committed them all. After these visits, Elena would lie awake, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. She should hate him. She did hate him. But she also understood him in a way that terrified her. The line between monster and man was not as clear as she had always believed. The nights she visited the human Adrian were different. He was growing stronger with each feeding, his body filling out, his eyes clearing, his mind sharpening. They would talk for hours in that dismal cell, and she learned that he was nothing like his vampire twin. Where the Count was all brooding intensity and dark charisma, the human Adrian possessed a gentle humor and quiet strength. He told her stories of his childhood, of growing up as the beloved son of a prince before his brother's transformation had destroyed everything. He spoke of his decades in the dungeon with surprising lack of bitterness, as if he had made peace with his fate long ago. He also spoke of his brother with a complicated mixture of love and sorrow. "We were inseparable as children," he told her. "He was always the stronger one, the natural leader, but he protected me fiercely. When the Turkish armies came and threatened our lands, he made the choice that would damn him. He bargained with dark powers for the strength to save our people. And he did save them for a time, but the cost was his soul." "Do you think he can be saved?" Elena asked. "Do you believe redemption is possible for him?" The human Adrian was quiet for a long time, his hand absently touching the place where she had cut her wrist to feed him. "I want to believe it," he said finally. "I have spent 50 years in this cell clinging to that hope, but I fear that the darkness has consumed too much of him. The man I knew, my brother, he is buried so deep beneath the monster that I do not know if he can ever claw his way back to the surface." The vampire Adrian heard these words through their twin connection and said nothing. But Elena could feel his pain like a physical thing, sharp and cutting. It was on the night of the first snowfall that everything changed. Elena had just finished feeding the human Adrian and was preparing to return to her chamber when they heard footsteps echoing in the corridor outside. Heavy footsteps, measured and deliberate, accompanied by the whisper of expensive fabric. The Count. The vampire Adrian moved with impossible speed, pushing Elena behind him, his body tense with protective instinct. The human Adrian rose to his feet, steadier now than he had been in years, and faced the door with quiet dignity. The Count entered without bothering to unlock the door, the chains and wards melting away at his presence. He surveyed the scene before him with eyes that gleamed like polished rubies, taking in his twin brother's improved condition, Elena's hastily bandaged wrist, the vampire Adrian's defensive posture. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "How touching," he said, his voice silk over steel. "A vampire playing hero, a human playing martyr, and a maiden playing savior. Did you truly think I would not know? Did you believe you could keep secrets in my own castle?" "It is not what you think," the vampire Adrian began, but the Count raised a hand to silence him. "Oh, but it is exactly what I think. You have been sneaking down here to let her feed our pathetic human shadow, hoping to restore his strength, so the three of you can plot some impossible escape. What I find most fascinating is that you, my other self, allowed this. You facilitated it. And do you know why?" He moved closer, circling them like a predator. "Because you are in love with her. Truly, genuinely in love. In a way I have not felt for 3 centuries. And it is destroying you because she looks at our human brother with eyes that hold what she cannot give to us. Compassion without fear, affection without revulsion, hope." Elena stepped forward, placing herself between the Count and the 2 Adrians. "If you are going to punish someone, punish me. This was my idea. I forced him to bring me here." The Count laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Forced? My dear innocent Elena, nothing forces a vampire to act against his will. He brought you here because some pathetic remnant of his humanity wanted to please you, wanted to see you happy, even if it meant strengthening his rival. And yes, he sees our human brother as a rival now. I can feel it through our connection, the jealousy eating at him like acid." The vampire Adrian's face was a mask of anguish. "Do not do this. Whatever punishment you devise, direct it at me. Let them be." "Oh, I have no intention of punishing anyone," the Count said, his smile widening. "On the contrary, I find this development absolutely delightful. You see, I have been conducting an experiment. I wanted to know if a vampire could truly feel human emotions again, if the right stimulus could awaken what the curse destroyed. And you, Elena, you have provided that stimulus magnificently. My other self loves you. Our human brother is falling in love with you. And you, caught between them, are torn in ways you do not yet fully understand." He moved to stand directly before Elena, tilting her chin up with one cold finger. "Here is what will happen. I am going to move our human brother to better accommodations. He will be given a chamber near yours, allowed to walk freely within certain sections of the castle, provided with proper food and clothing. In return, he will serve as your companion during the daylight hours when I sleep. You will come to know him, to care for him, perhaps even to love him, and we will see what happens when you must choose between the human who wears our face and the monster who owns your heart through that cursed kiss." "This is cruelty," the vampire Adrian said. "You are toying with them like a cat with mice." "I am giving them what they want," the Count corrected. "Freedom, companionship, hope. The fact that these gifts come wrapped in torment is merely a side effect. Besides, I am curious. I want to see which of us she chooses, the man or the monster, the familiar comfort of humanity or the terrible passion of the damned." "I will choose neither," Elena said, finding her voice despite her fear. "I will find a way to free us all from this nightmare you have created." The Count's expression softened into something almost resembling fondness. "That spirit, that defiance, that is precisely why you fascinate me. Most would have broken by now, would have accepted their fate and tried to make peace with captivity. But you continue to fight, to hope, to love. It is beautiful and futile and utterly human." He turned to the human Adrian, who had remained silent throughout this exchange. "You have been given a gift, brother. Use it wisely. She has shared her blood with you, strengthened you, risked herself for you. Do not waste this opportunity by clinging to the past. The man I was, the brother you remember, he is gone. What remains is merely an echo, a ghost wearing familiar flesh." The human Adrian met his vampire twin's eyes, and something passed between them, some communication beyond words. "You are wrong," he said quietly. "You are not gone, you are simply lost. And perhaps with her help you can find your way back." The Count's expression darkened. "Sentiment will not save any of you. The curse is absolute. The only way to break it is through death, mine or yours or perhaps all of ours. Are you prepared for that ending, Elena? Are you ready to kill or be killed for the sake of something as fragile and temporary as love?" Elena looked between the two Adrians, the vampire and the human, so alike and yet so different. "No," she said. "I am not prepared for death, but I am prepared to live, to fight, to search every corner of this cursed castle until I find another way. There must be something, some ancient knowledge, some forgotten magic that can break this curse without destroying you completely." The Count studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. I will give you 1 year, 12 full moons. Use that time to search my library, to study the ancient texts, to perform whatever rituals or experiments you believe might work. If by the end of that year you have found nothing, then you will make your choice. You will either embrace the darkness and join me in eternal night, becoming what I am, or you will die. There is no third option." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The vampire Adrian looked as if he wanted to protest, but the Count's expression brooked no argument. It was done. The terms were set. "Magda will prepare chambers for our human guest," the Count continued, as if discussing something as mundane as dinner plans. "He will be bathed, clothed, fed properly. Tomorrow at sunset, Elena, you will dine with both of us, and we will begin this fascinating social experiment in earnest. I am most eager to see how it unfolds." With that, he swept from the cell, leaving behind a silence heavy with implications. The vampire Adrian was the first to speak. "I'm sorry, I should have been more careful. I should have known he was watching." "He is always watching," the human Adrian said tiredly. "That is the nature of the Count. He sees everything, knows everything that happens within these walls. The fact that he let our meetings continue for this long means he wanted this to happen. We have been dancing to his tune all along. Elena felt a wave of despair wash over her, but she forced it back. Then we will have to write our own music, she said, with more confidence than she felt. We have a year. That is more time than I expected. We will use every day of it. The vampire Adrian looked at her with something that might have been admiration, or might have been grief. You are either the bravest woman I have ever known or the most foolish. I cannot decide which. Perhaps I am both, Elena replied, but I refuse to give up. Not on you, not on your brother, not on myself. The Count may think he has won by setting these terms, but he has given us something valuable. Time, and with time comes possibility. In the weeks that followed, a strange new routine established itself. The human Adrian was indeed moved to a chamber near Elena's, and they spent their days together, walking the permitted corridors, reading in the library, talking about everything and nothing. He was good company, gentle and thoughtful, with a wit that emerged as his strength returned. Elena found herself laughing with him, enjoying his presence in a way that felt dangerously close to affection. But her nights belonged to the vampire. He continued his visits, sometimes wearing his true form, sometimes appearing as the Adrian she had first loved. They would debate philosophy and theology, argue about the nature of good and evil, discuss the texts she was studying in her search for a cure. These conversations were intense, intellectually stimulating, and charged with an undercurrent of tension that Elena could not ignore. The vampire Adrian challenged her, provoked her, made her think and feel in ways the gentle human brother never did. She was falling in love with both of them, she realized with horror, or perhaps she was falling in love with the man they might have been together, if fate had not torn them apart. The human Adrian represented safety, normalcy, the life she could have had. The vampire Adrian represented passion, intensity, the dark allure of the forbidden. One night, as winter deepened and snow piled high against the castle walls, Elena made a discovery in the library. An ancient manuscript, written in a language she barely understood, but which seemed to describe a ritual. A way to reunite a vampire's fractured soul, to merge the human and demonic aspects into a single being capable of walking in daylight without losing immortality. But the ritual required a sacrifice, blood and tears and something more, something the text called the willing heart. She brought her findings to both Adrians, and they studied the manuscript together by candlelight, the three of them huddled around the ancient text like conspirators. The vampire Adrian was skeptical, pointing out the vagueness of the instructions, the likelihood that it was merely legend rather than fact. The human Adrian was more hopeful, but also afraid of what the ritual might cost. If it works, he said, we would be one person again. I would cease to exist as a separate being. My consciousness would merge with his, and what emerged would be neither fully human nor fully vampire, but something in between. Are you prepared for that, Elena? Are you prepared to lose me? Elena looked between them, her heart aching with the impossible choice. I do not want to lose either of you, she said, but I also cannot bear to see you remain as you are, fractured and suffering. If there is even a chance this could work, we have to try. The vampire Adrian touched her face with cold fingers. The willing heart, he said softly. That is the key phrase that troubles me. What do you think it means? I think, Elena said slowly, that it means someone must offer their heart freely, without coercion or manipulation. Someone must choose love over fear, acceptance over rejection, union over separation. I think it means me. The snow fell outside the library windows, silent and relentless, covering the world in white. And in the shadows beyond the candlelight, unseen and unheard, the Count smiled. His experiment was proceeding exactly as he had hoped. Soon, very soon, they would attempt the ritual, and when they did, he would finally have his answer to the question that had haunted him for 3 centuries. Could a monster learn to love again? Or would love only destroy what little humanity remained? The game was reaching its climax, and the stakes had never been higher. The winter solstice approached, and with it, the night Elena had chosen for the ritual. The manuscript specified that the ceremony must be performed when darkness held its greatest power, when the barrier between life and death grew thin enough to pierce. She spent her days preparing, gathering the necessary components from the castle's vast stores. Candles made from the fat of black sheep, salt blessed by a priest who had renounced his vows, a silver blade that had never tasted blood, and her own blood, of course, freely given. The human Adrian helped her prepare, though his hands shook when he handled the ritual implements. They had grown close over the months, their friendship deepening into something neither dared name. He would read to her in the evenings, his voice warm and soothing, filling the cold stone chambers with stories of heroes and lost kingdoms. Sometimes their hands would brush as they passed books between them, and Elena would feel her heart quicken in a way that was both comforting and confusing. You could still choose a different path, he told her one afternoon as they sat in the library, snow falling softly beyond the windows. You could refuse the ritual, wait out the year, and then accept death rather than transformation. At least then your soul would remain your own. Elena set down the ancient text she had been studying and looked at him. Would you want that? Would you prefer I die rather than risk this ceremony? The human Adrian's face twisted with emotion. No, he said quietly, I am too selfish to wish for your death, but I fear what the ritual might cost you. The text speaks of sacrifice, of offering your heart. What if it means your literal heart? What if the magic requires your life to fuel the transformation? Then I will have died trying to save someone, Elena replied. That seems a better end than most people receive, better than wasting away in a village, marrying a man I do not love, watching my father die slowly while I am powerless to help him. At least here my death would have meaning. You speak of death so easily now, he observed. When you first came here, you were terrified. What changed? Elena considered the question, her fingers tracing the worn leather binding of the manuscript. I think I finally understood that there are worse things than dying. Living without purpose, without love, without hope, that is the true death. Your brother, the vampire, he has existed for 3 centuries in that state, an eternity of emptiness. If I can give him back even a fragment of what he lost, if I can help him remember what it means to be human, then whatever price I pay is worth it. The human Adrian reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and alive. You have already given him more than he deserves. You have shown him compassion when he showed you only deception. You have offered him redemption when he offered you only captivity. Do not forget, Elena, that he is the reason you are here. He stole your freedom, bound you with dark magic, imprisoned you in this castle. Whatever feelings you have developed for him, they were born from manipulation. Elena wanted to argue, but she could not. There was truth in his words, bitter and sharp. The vampire Adrian had deceived her, had worn his brother's face like a mask to study her, to understand her. The bond between them was artificial, created by a kiss stolen under false pretenses. And yet, she could not deny what she felt when the vampire visited her at night. The electricity that crackled between them, the sense of recognition that went deeper than reason or logic. It was as if her soul knew his, had always known his, across lifetimes and dimensions. The vampire Adrian himself had grown increasingly conflicted as the solstice approached. His visits became more frequent, more intense. He would appear in her chamber after midnight and simply stand there, watching her with eyes that flickered between human and demonic. Sometimes he would speak for hours, pouring out centuries of loneliness and regret. Other times he would remain silent, his presence heavy with unspoken words. One night, less than a week before the ritual, he appeared in a state of visible agitation. His hair was disheveled, his clothing torn, and his eyes burned with an inner fire that made Elena draw back instinctively. I fed tonight, he said without preamble, his voice rough with self-loathing. A traveler on the mountain road, a young man with a wife and children waiting at home. I drained him until his heart stopped, until there was nothing left but a husk. And do you know what the worst part is? I enjoyed it. Every moment of it. The terror in his eyes, the desperate struggle, the final surrender. That is what I am, Elena. That is what you are trying to redeem. A monster who takes pleasure in suffering. Elena forced herself to remain calm, though fear coiled in her stomach. Why are you telling me this? Why do you want me to see you at your worst? Because I need you to understand what you are choosing, he said. Moving closer, his movements predatory. When you perform this ritual, when you offer your heart, You are not saving some tragic figure from a fairy tale. You are binding yourself to a killer, a creature that has ended thousands of lives without remorse. The human part of me, the part that remembers compassion and love, it is so small, so weak compared to the darkness. What if the ritual fails? What if it only makes things worse? Then we will deal with that when it happens, Elena said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. But I refuse to abandon you based on what might go wrong. You came here tonight to frighten me, to make me reconsider. But all you have done is prove that the darkness terrifies you as much as it terrifies me. And that means there is still something human inside you worth saving. The vampire Adrian stared at her, and for a moment she saw the monster fully unveiled. His face was no longer beautiful but terrible, angular and pale as death, his eyes glowing like coals, his mouth revealing fangs that could tear through flesh like paper. He was nightmare made manifest, the creature parents warned their children about, the evil that lurked in shadows and fed on innocence. And yet Elena did not run. She stood her ground, meeting his inhuman gaze, and slowly, the monster receded. His features softened back into the familiar face she had come to know, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "How can you look at me like that? How can you stand there without fear when you have seen what I truly am?" "Because I have also seen what you could be," she replied. "I have seen the gentleness in your hands when you tend the roses. I have heard the sorrow in your voice when you speak of your lost humanity. I have felt your anguish through the bond we share. You are not just a monster. You are a man trapped inside a monster, screaming to be free. And I will not abandon you to that fate." Something broke in him then. He moved forward and pulled her into his arms, holding her with desperate intensity, his face buried in her hair. She could feel him trembling, could feel the war raging inside him between the desire to protect her and the hunger to consume her. His body was cold, unnaturally so, but his embrace felt like the only real thing in a world of shadows and lies. "I do not deserve your compassion," he said against her hair. "I do not deserve your sacrifice." "Perhaps not," Eleanor agreed, her arms coming up to hold him in return. "But you have them anyway." They stood like that for a long time, two souls clinging to each other in the darkness, seeking warmth in a cold and merciless world. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were no longer glowing, and his expression held a vulnerability she had never seen before. "If the ritual works," he said quietly, "if we succeed in reuniting my fractured soul, I will not be the same person. The vampire will merge with the human, and what emerges will be something entirely new. You may find that you do not love what I become. Then I will learn to love you again," Elena said simply, "as many times as necessary." He touched her face with fingers that were no longer quite so cold. "You are extraordinary," he whispered. "In 3 centuries, I have never met anyone like you. Perhaps that is why fate brought you here. Perhaps you are the answer to a prayer I stopped believing would be answered long ago." The night before the solstice, the Count summoned all 3 of them to the great hall. It was a vast chamber Eleanor had never seen before, with vaulted ceilings disappearing into shadow and walls lined with ancient weapons and tattered banners. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to roast an ox, but its heat seemed unable to penetrate the chill that permeated the space. The Count sat upon a throne of black stone, dressed in robes of crimson velvet, that made him look like a king from some dark fairy tale. His expression was unreadable as the 3 of them approached, the vampire Adrian and his human twin flanking Elena like guards. "So," the Count said, his voice echoing through the hall, "tomorrow night you will attempt your ritual. You will try to do what I have failed to accomplish in 300 years. You will try to reclaim what was lost when I made my bargain with darkness. Tell me, Elena, what makes you think you will succeed where I have failed?" Elena met his gaze without flinching. "Because I am not doing this alone. I have help. I have love. And I have hope. 3 things you abandoned long ago." The Count's smile was sharp as a blade. "Hope is the cruelest curse of all, my dear. It keeps us clinging to possibilities that do not exist, dreaming of futures that will never come. I gave up hope the night I rose from my grave as something other than human, and I have been free ever since. Free to pursue power without guilt, pleasure without consequence, existence without meaning. Is that not a form of liberation? It is a form of death, the human Adrian spoke up, his voice steady despite the fear Elena could see in his eyes. You have convinced yourself that feeling nothing is the same as being free. But true freedom comes from accepting all emotions, both joy and suffering, love and loss. You chose power, brother, and it cost you everything that makes existence worthwhile. The Count's expression darkened. Do not presume to lecture me on choices, human shadow. You who have cowered in dungeons for 50 years, rather than accept the gift of immortality I offered you. You who watched me transform into something magnificent and recoiled in horror instead of embracing the possibilities. You are weak, as our father was weak, as all mortals are weak. And yet, the vampire Adrian said quietly, speaking for the first time, you keep him alive. You feed him your blood, keep him imprisoned but preserved. Why, if not because some part of you still remembers what it means to love a brother? The Count rose from his throne, his movement fluid and dangerous. Do not mistake sentiment for love. I keep him alive because he is useful, a reminder of what I left behind, a mirror to show me how far I have transcended my former limitations. And now he serves another purpose. He is your rival, my other self. He offers Elena everything you cannot, warmth, mortality, a normal life. And yet she still comes to you at night, still looks at you with eyes full of longing and fear, and something deeper. That fascinates me. That is why I allow this ritual to proceed. You are allowing it because you want it to succeed, Elena said suddenly, understanding dawning. You want us to find a way to restore your humanity, because you are too proud or too afraid to admit that you want it yourself. The Count stared at her, and for just a moment his mask slipped. She saw beneath the cold amusement to the raw wound that lay beneath, the grief of centuries, the unbearable weight of eternal existence without purpose or connection. Then the mask returned, seamless and impenetrable. Believe what you wish, he said. Tomorrow at midnight you will perform your ritual in the castle's inner sanctum. I have prepared the space according to the manuscript specifications. Whether you succeed or fail, whether you live or die, I will be watching. And if you do manage to achieve the impossible, if you do find a way to reunite a fractured soul, then perhaps I will let you leave this place. All three of you, or whatever remains of you after the magic has taken its toll, you would release us, the human Adrian asked, suspicion heavy in his voice. I would have no further use for you, the Count replied with a shrug. The experiment would be complete. Besides, I am curious to see if redemption is truly possible, or if it is merely another beautiful lie we tell ourselves to make existence bearable. Now go. Prepare yourselves. Tomorrow night, you will either transcend what you are or be destroyed by the attempt. I find both possibilities equally entertaining. He dismissed them with a wave of his hand, and they retreated from the great hall, the weight of his words pressing down upon them like a physical burden. As they walked through the corridors back toward Elena's chamber, the three of them said nothing, each lost in their own thoughts and fears. That night Elena could not sleep. She lay in her bed watching the moonlight paint silver patterns across the floor and tried to prepare herself for what was to come. She had memorized the ritual, had gathered every component, had steeled her heart for the sacrifice that would be required. But she could not shake the feeling that she was missing something, that there was some crucial element she had overlooked. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She rose and opened it to find the human Adrian standing in the corridor, his face pale but resolute. I could not let the night pass without saying this, he said quietly, in case tomorrow brings an end to everything. I love you, Elena. I know I have no right to such feelings, that you are bound to my brother by magic and perhaps by choice, but I wanted you to know. In all my years of imprisonment, in all the darkness and despair, you have been the only light. Whatever happens tomorrow, I am grateful that I knew you even briefly. Before Elena could respond, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, a benediction rather than a claim. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart aching with the weight of impossible choices. She loved them both, she realized, the gentle human who represented everything good and pure in the world, and the tortured vampire who represented passion and darkness and redemption. How could she choose between them? How could she sacrifice one to save the other? The answer came to her as the first light of dawn began to creep through her window, pale and cold. She could not choose. She would not choose. The ritual required a willing heart, and her heart was willing to embrace them both, to accept the darkness and the light, to merge them, just as the magic would merge the fractured soul. She would offer not just her blood or her life, but her love, complete and unconditional, for the whole being they could become together. It was madness, perhaps. It was certainly dangerous. But it felt right in a way that nothing else had, since the night she first kissed the man she thought was a simple gardener. Tomorrow night, she would step into the ritual circle and offer everything she was. And whatever emerged from that circle, whether it was redemption or destruction, at least it would be the truth. The dawn broke over the Carpathian Mountains, cold and beautiful and merciless, and in the castle of shadows, 3 souls prepared to gamble everything on the possibility of transformation. The longest night of the year was coming, and with it, the moment when all debts would be paid and all choices made final. The Count watched from his tower, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. His experiment had exceeded all expectations. Now came the final test. Would love prove stronger than the curse, or would the curse devour love and leave only ashes and regret? Soon, very soon, he would have his answer. And perhaps, if the gods were feeling merciful, he might finally find his own redemption or his final damnation. Either would be preferable to the endless grey existence he had endured for far too long. The game was almost over. Only the final move remained. The winter solstice arrived cloaked in silence. No wind stirred the snow that lay thick upon the castle grounds. No birds called from the frozen forests. No sound disturbed the waiting darkness. It was as if the world itself held its breath, anticipating what would transpire when midnight came. Elena spent the day in quiet preparation. She bathed in water scented with roses and salt, dressed in a simple white gown that reminded her of a burial shroud, and braided her hair with threads of silver that Magda had provided without explanation. The old servant said nothing as she helped with these preparations, but her ancient eyes held something that might have been sorrow or might have been hope. It was impossible to tell which. The human Adrian came to her chamber as the sun set, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of blood and gold. He carried a small wooden box, worn smooth by decades of handling, and when he opened it, Elena saw a single rose preserved inside, its petals still vibrant red, despite what must have been years of captivity. "Our mother gave this to us before she died," he said softly, his voice thick with memory. "She told us to give it to the woman we loved when we found her. My brother kept it all these centuries, through his transformation and the endless years that followed. Last night, he asked me to give it to you. He said that whether the ritual succeeds or fails, whether we live or die, you should have it. Because you are the one our mother told us about in the stories she used to tell, the one who would teach us what love truly means." Eleanor took the rose with trembling hands, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down upon this small token. The petals were soft as silk, impossibly preserved, and when she brought it to her face, it smelled of summers long past, of innocence and joy before darkness fell. "Tell him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell him that I understand now. The ritual does not require my heart to be torn from my chest. It requires my heart to be given freely, completely, to both of you. To the man you were, and the monster he became, and the being you will become together. That is the sacrifice. Not death, but absolute surrender." The human Adrian looked at her with eyes that held such tender sadness. "You have always understood more than we gave you credit for. I used to think you were simply innocent, naive, a girl who did not comprehend the darkness she faced. But you are far wiser than any of us. You see what we cannot. That love and darkness are not opposites but parts of a whole. That redemption comes not from destroying the monster, but from accepting it, integrating it, making peace with all that we are." He leaned forward and kissed her gently on the lips, a kiss nothing like the passionate embrace she had shared with his vampire twin in the rose garden. This was softer, sadder, a farewell wrapped in blessing. When he pulled away, she saw tears on his cheeks. "Whatever happens tonight," he whispered, "know that you have already saved me. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what it felt like. You made me remember that even in the darkest prison, the human spirit can find light. I love you, Elena. I will always love you, in whatever form I exist after the magic has done its work." He left her then, and she was alone with the preserved rose and her thoughts and the growing darkness beyond her window. She placed the rose carefully in her hair, weaving it into her braid, and felt its presence like a talisman against the night. When midnight approached, Magda came to escort her to the inner sanctum. They descended through corridors Elena had never seen, past doors sealed with ancient symbols, down staircases that seemed to wind into the very foundations of the world. The air grew colder with each step, thick with power and the weight of centuries. Finally, they reached a chamber carved from living rock, a perfect circle with symbols etched into the floor and ceiling, pulsing with a faint luminescence that cast no shadows. The vampire Adrian stood at the center of the circle, dressed in black robes that made him look like death itself. The human Adrian stood opposite him, wearing white to mirror Eleanor's gown, and between them lay the ritual components, candles arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly, the silver blade gleaming with reflected light, a chalice filled with wine so dark it could have been blood, and the ancient manuscript, open to the page that described the ceremony, in words that seemed to shift and change as Elena watched. The Count observed from beyond the circle, seated upon a chair of carved stone, his expression unreadable. When Elena entered, his eyes met hers, and she saw something there she had never expected to see. Fear, not for himself, but for them, for what they were about to attempt, for the price they might pay. The vampire Adrian extended his hand toward Elena, and she took it, feeling the familiar coldness of his touch. The human Adrian took her other hand, his warmth a stark contrast, and together they formed a triangle at the center of the circle. The symbols on the floor began to glow brighter, responding to their presence, and Elena felt power gathering in the air like a storm preparing to break. "Do you know what you offer?" the vampire Adrian asked, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. "Do you truly understand what the willing heart means?" Elena looked between them, these two aspects of the same soul, and smiled despite her fear. "Yes," she said, "I offer my heart not as a sacrifice, but as a gift. I offer my love not to save you from what you are, but to help you become what you could be. I offer my life not to pay a debt, but to create a bridge between darkness and light, between what was lost and what can still be found. The ritual requires words," the human Adrian said, his voice steady despite the trembling of his hand in hers. "Words of power, spoken in a language older than Latin, older than the castle, older than the curse itself. But it also requires truth. So before we speak the ancient words, let us speak our own truths. Let there be no deception, no masks, no games. Only honesty, however painful." The vampire Adrian nodded, and when he spoke his voice was raw with emotion. "I love you, Elena. I have loved you since the first moment I saw you in the garden. Before I knew what love meant, before I remembered I was capable of such feeling. I love you with everything that remains of my humanity and everything that has become monstrous. I love you enough to risk oblivion, to gamble my existence on the possibility of being worthy of that love. That is my truth." The human Adrian spoke next, tears streaming freely down his face. "I love you, Elena, with a love that is simpler but no less profound. I love your courage, your compassion, your refusal to surrender to despair. I love the way you look at my brother without flinching, seeing the man beneath the monster. I love you enough to merge with him, to give up my separate existence, so that we can become something capable of being with you in both darkness and light. That is my truth." Elena felt tears burning in her own eyes, but her voice remained steady. "I love you both," she said. "I love the gentle gardener who showed me tenderness, and I love the tormented vampire who showed me passion. I love the human who represents hope, and I love the monster who represents acceptance of all we fear. I choose you both. I refuse to choose between you. And I offer my heart as the vessel that will hold you together, the bridge that will reunite what was torn apart. That is my truth." The moment the words left her lips, the symbols on the floor blazed with light so brilliant it should have been blinding, but somehow Eleanor could still see. The vampire Adrian began to chant in the ancient language, words that resonated in her bones and made the air shimmer like heat over desert sands. The human Adrian joined him, their voices harmonizing impossibly, creating a sound that was both beautiful and terrible. Eleanor felt the silver blade press against her palm, felt blood well up and drip onto the floor where the symbols drank it hungrily. She felt the vampire's cold touch and the human's warm touch merging, felt something fundamental shift in the fabric of reality. The boundary between them began to blur, and through the bond she shared with the vampire, she felt both of them at once. The hunger and the hope, the darkness and the light, the despair and the determination. The pain came suddenly, a tearing sensation in her chest, as if her heart were being pulled from her body. She gasped, trying to breathe, and felt, rather than saw, the two Adrians moving closer, their forms beginning to shimmer and overlap. The vampire's cold and the human's warmth met somewhere in between, creating something that was neither and both. "Do not fight it," a voice said, and Elena could not tell if it came from the vampire or the human, or some third entity that was emerging between them. "Let go. Trust us. Trust yourself. Trust the love that binds us all." Elena released her fear and let herself fall into the sensation, into the magic, into the love that connected them. She felt her heart, her literal heart, being offered up. Not destroyed, but transformed into something else. Energy, light, a bridge made of blood and tears, and absolute devotion. The two Adrians were merging now. She could see it through eyes that seemed to perceive multiple realities at once. The vampire's dark elegance and the human's gentle warmth flowing together like water and wine, creating something entirely new. The process was beautiful and agonizing. Creation and destruction happening simultaneously. She heard them scream, or perhaps it was her own scream, as their separate existences dissolved and reformed. Then, in a flash of light so intense it seemed to burn away the darkness itself, the transformation completed. Where two men had stood, there was now one. He had the vampire's height and the human's warmth, the monster's beauty and the man's gentleness. His eyes were no longer glowing red or simple brown, but something in between, twilight given form. His skin held color, faint but present, as if blood actually flowed through his veins. And when he opened his mouth there were no fangs, only human teeth behind lips that curved into a smile of wonder and recognition. "Elena," he said, and his voice was both familiar voices, merged into one, neither cold nor warm, but perfectly balanced. "My Elena. We are whole. For the first time in 3 centuries, we are whole." She tried to respond, but her strength was failing. The ritual had taken more than she anticipated, and she felt herself falling, the world going grey at the edges. Strong arms caught her, arms that were neither cold nor burning hot, but pleasantly warm, alive, real. She looked up into a face that was both Adrian's and neither, a man reborn from the ashes of what he had been. "Rest now," he said softly, cradling her against his chest. "You have given us everything. You have made us real again. Sleep. My love, we will be here when you wake." The last thing Elena saw before darkness claimed her was the Count rising from his throne, his face transformed by an emotion she had never seen there before. Not amusement or cruel interest, but naked longing. He moved toward them, drawn by what had happened, by the miracle he had witnessed. "Teach me," the Count whispered, his voice breaking. "Teach me how you did this. Teach me how to be whole again." But Elena heard no more. She slipped into unconsciousness, her heart transformed by magic and love, beating strong and steady in her chest. She had not died. She had not lost herself. She had become something more, something connected to the being they had created together. She woke 3 days later in her chamber, sunlight streaming through the windows. Real sunlight, warm and golden, nothing like the pale filtered light that usually penetrated the castle's gloom. She sat up slowly, her body weak but whole, and found him sitting in a chair beside her bed. Not the vampire Adrian, not the human Adrian, but the man they had become together, watching her with eyes full of love and gratitude. "You came back," he said simply. "I was afraid you would not wake." Eleanor touched her chest, feeling her heart beat steady and strong beneath her fingers. "What happened?" she asked. "How long was I unconscious?" 3 days, he replied. "The ritual took everything you had and transformed it into the power needed to reunite my fractured soul. Your heart stopped twice. I thought I had killed you, that my selfishness had destroyed the one thing in this world worth preserving. But your heart remembered how to beat. Your will to live was stronger than the magic that tried to claim you." He reached out and took her hand, and she felt the warmth of his touch, the steady pulse that proved he was alive in a way he had not been for centuries. "I can walk in sunlight now," he said, wonder in his voice. "I can feel warmth, I can taste food. I still have strength beyond a normal man, still heal faster than I should. But the curse is broken. I am no longer damned. I am no longer split between two impossible states. I am simply me, Adrian, whole at last." "And your brother?" Elena asked. "The human Adrian, is he truly gone?" Adrian smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile she had ever seen, combining the vampire's intensity with the human's gentleness. "He is not gone. He is me. I remember being him, remember 50 years in that dungeon, remember the fear and hope and love. But I also remember being the vampire, remember 3 centuries of darkness and hunger and despair. All of it is part of me now. All of it has been integrated, accepted, made whole. There is no more division, no more war between light and dark. Only balance." He helped her stand, supporting her until her strength returned and led her to the window. Beyond, she could see the castle grounds transformed. The snow had melted despite the season, revealing gardens bursting with new growth. The roses bloomed in impossible profusion, red and white and every shade between, and in the distance she could see the iron gates standing open, the path to the village clear and inviting. "The Count kept his promise," Adrian said. "When he saw what we had accomplished, when he witnessed the transformation, something in him broke, or perhaps something in him healed. He has released us. We are free to leave, free to go wherever we wish. Your family has been provided for, more gold than they will ever need. And you, my love, you have a choice to make." "What choice?" Elena asked, though she thought she already knew. "You can return to your village," Adrian said. "Resume your life. Marry a good man, have children, grow old in peace. I will not stop you. You have given me more than I ever deserved. I have no right to ask for more. Or," Elena prompted. "Or you can stay with me," he said, his voice catching with emotion, "not as a prisoner but as a partner. We could travel, see the world beyond these mountains. I have wealth accumulated over centuries, knowledge of places and times you could not imagine. We could help people, use what I have learned to ease suffering, to fight the darkness that still exists in the world. You taught me that redemption is possible. Now I want to spend whatever time I have proving that lesson to others." Elena looked at this man who was 2 men combined, this miracle born of magic and sacrifice and love, and felt her heart swell with certainty. There was no decision to make. There had never been a decision to make. "I choose you," she said, "not because you are holding me captive or because magic binds us, but because I love you, all of you. The darkness and the light, the monster and the man, the past and the future. I choose you freely, completely, without reservation or regret." Adrian pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was like the first kiss in the garden and nothing like it at all. It was warm and passionate and tender, without the cold edge of the vampire or the tentative gentleness of the human. It was perfect, and it was real, and it was theirs. They left the castle that very day, walking hand in hand through the open gates as the sun reached its zenith in a clear blue sky. Behind them the castle stood silent, no longer a prison, but simply a monument to what had been. The Count watched them go from a high tower window, his ancient face unreadable. Magda found him there hours later, still staring at the empty road. "Master," she said carefully, "will you let them go so easily? After 300 years of loneliness, will you not fight to keep them here?" The Count turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Tears. "I cannot keep them," he said simply. They have found what I thought was impossible. They have proven that love is stronger than curses, that redemption is not a lie we tell ourselves, but a truth we can achieve. And if they can do it, if a simple peasant girl and a fractured vampire can break the bonds of damnation, then perhaps there is hope for me as well. What will you do? Magda asked. I will search, the Count replied, as they searched. I will study the ancient texts, perform the rituals, seek my own redemption. It may take another 3 centuries. It may never happen at all. But they have given me something I lost long ago. They have given me hope. And that, my faithful Magda, is worth more than all the power in the world. Far below, Elena and Adrian reached the village just as the sun began to set. They did not stop there but continued walking, toward the west, toward lands neither had ever seen, toward a future bright with possibility. They would face challenges, certainly. The world was not kind to those who were different, and Adrian would always carry marks of what he had been. But they would face those challenges together, 2 souls joined by a bond forged in darkness and tempered by love. Years later, travelers would tell stories of a mysterious couple who appeared in times of trouble, who helped the sick and defended the weak, who fought against injustice with strength that seemed more than human. Some called them angels, others called them legends. A few, who had lived long enough to remember the dark times, whispered that they were the redemption of a curse, proof that even the damned could find salvation. But those who met them, who looked into their eyes and saw the depths of love and sorrow and hope, reflected there, knew the truth. They were simply 2 people who had learned the hardest lesson of all. That love does not conquer darkness by destroying it, but by accepting it, transforming it, making it part of something whole and beautiful and real. In the Carpathian Mountains, in a castle slowly being reclaimed by nature, a vampire who had once been a count knelt in a ritual circle and began to chant in an ancient language. His voice was uncertain at first, then growing stronger, filled with determination and something he had not felt in centuries: hope. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of crimson and gold, and in the gathering darkness roses bloomed, red and white and every shade between, their petals opening toward the stars, their perfume filling the air with the promise of spring, of renewal, of impossible transformations that begin with a single act of courage and love. The story ended as all stories must. But the love was eternal, transcending curses and time and the boundaries between light and dark. And in that truth, there was redemption enough for everyone, even monsters, even the damned, even those who had given up hope of ever finding their way home. The roses remembered, the mountains remembered, and somewhere in the world a couple walked hand in hand, carrying that memory forward, spreading hope like seeds that would bloom in the most unlikely places. This was not the end. It was the beginning of something better, something real, something worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. Love, pure, transformative, redemptive love. And it was enough.